afternoon, everyone. This is Janie Kreco from the Recruitment Training and Support Center at the Federation for Children with Special Needs. Welcome to our March webinar, and today we're going to be talking about MCAS and reaching your students' potential. Our speakers today are Peggy O'Hare, who is the Program Director at the Recruitment Training and Support Center, and Laura Yellick, who is the Training Coordinator for the Parent Training Institute at the Federation. As usual, everybody's mic will be muted, so if you do have questions, type them in the toolbar at the side, and we will get to them as time allows. And I think we're ready to go. Peggy, would you like to introduce yourself and start off?
Sure. Thanks, Janie. This is Peggy O'Hare. I am the Director of the Recruitment Training and Support Center, and I'm happy to be with you all this afternoon to talk about MCAS and how to help students reach their proficiency. I have a colleague from the Federation for Children with Special Needs, Laura Yellick, who works at the PTI, or Parent Training and Information Center, who's going to help me with this webinar and talk about how students with disabilities take MCAS, accommodations, and some of the considerations that you might want to keep in mind for your students as you plan taking the MCAS. It's a timely topic right now. We are in the midst of MCAS test-taking season. In fact, some of you might know that the MCAS for today, which was the reading comprehension writing prompts or essays, was postponed until next week because of the snow. So I hope everybody's warm and safe, and hope that you enjoy this seminar. Let's take a look at what we're going to be talking about this afternoon. I'm going to start with some of the information that we think is essential to understanding why we're taking MCAS. We're going to take a look at standard-based education and take a look at the curriculum frameworks in which the MCAS are based. We're going to then talk about how MCAS is for all students, and then really drill down and focus on MCAS for students with disabilities. Laura's going to help me with that and really share some of her experiences that she's had with MCAS as well. We're going to talk a bit about accommodations for students with social and emotional disabilities and high school completion. If we don't get to all of this today, we did schedule a part 2 because there's a big important part that you folks as educational advocates, as parents, as special education surrogate parents need to know, which is how to read the Parent Guardian report that talks about the students' scores on the MCAS and understanding what that really means. So let's get started right away, taking a look at 5 steps that are involved in standard-based education. This was a movement that Massachusetts engaged in the early 1990s, that long ago, and the nation has finally caught up with us and really gotten involved in standard-based education as well. And it's simply 5 steps. First, parents, educators, researchers, professors, all kinds of folks gather together to set up standards. What should students learn in each of the grades, in each of the various curriculum areas? I think this was a reaction to the inconsistency that we saw here in Massachusetts of what was being taught in different schools across the Commonwealth. So now they worked for a number of years, actually, to create what was called the Massachusetts Curriculum Framework. It's now been changed to include the Common Core standards that are a national framework. We'll talk about that in a little bit more. Step 2 is, okay, we're in agreement about what those standards should be. We need to develop a curriculum. And local school districts decide what kind of curriculum or syllabus they're going to use. What program are they going to use to teach mathematics in grade 3 all the way up? What are they going to do in terms of English language arts? So it's up to the local school system to choose those curriculums that meet those standards that are set for the state. Then it's individual schools and teachers to design the courses that will, and the daily classroom activities that will fulfill the curriculum. Included in here is also for students with disabilities how they are working on their IEP and making sure that that is part of the curriculum that meets the standards. So as you can see, we're kind of always building towards those standards. Once the standards have been set, curriculum chosen, individual classes and courses are all in place and you've implemented, we need to see how the students and the schools are doing. So step 4 is assessing the performance of both the schools and the students in learning and in teaching these standards. And the 5th step, an important step that if it's not done, all the other 4 are meaningless, is to take a look at the results. And based on those results, make improvements both for the individual student and for the school. Included in this is also taking a look at how the individual student on an IEP is doing, and maybe that IEP needs to be changed as well based on the results of that test. So those are the 5 steps, and that very important second step, or the first step, which is the standards, just so that you all know that there are standards for all of those curriculum areas. In Massachusetts, all we're doing right now is testing in mathematics, science and technology, and English language arts. That fits into what are the requirements at the federal level, so that's what we follow. Just to keep you all up to date as much as possible, Massachusetts has accepted the Common Core state standards. There was an effort afoot probably about 3 years ago, maybe 4, where states across the country said, we really need to have a Common Core. We need to have the same standards. So students in Rhode Island are learning what students in Massachusetts are. Students in Texas are learning the same things. So there was a push actually by the governors of states to set educational standards for all students across the U.S. A lot of work was done on it. The focus was to make sure that students were ready for both college and careers after high school. And a part of the federal funding raised to the top was the inclusion of the requirement that states accept the Common Core standards. It's up to each of the states to choose whether or not they're going to accept these national kinds of standards. And Massachusetts did say yes, mostly because the standards were really based on our curriculum frameworks. They took a lot of information and the structure of our frameworks to implement these national standards. We are to have it fully implemented next school year rather, as you can see, 2013-2014, and national tests by 14 to 15 school years. So we have some changes coming, but in the meantime, we are using that kind of a mixture of the Common Core standards and the math curriculum framework. Okay. So let's drill down and really talk about what MCAS is. It really stands for Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System. Comprehensive, you saw all the different topics that the tests cover. It is an assessment. It really is a test, but it's a test for schools and for students, and it's part of a big system. It's really kind of complex now, and we're going to take a look at some of the parts of it. Okay. I think the first thing that everybody needs to know is that students in public schools, all students in public schools here in Massachusetts, have to take the MCAS. This includes students receiving special education services, students who are English language learners, students, of course, in general education, any student who is receiving publicly funded education. This does not include students who are in private schools, who are being homeschooled, but it certainly does include students who are in charter schools in collaborative. And this is an old term, but I think we still use it, the approved private Chapter 766 schools. So they're the special education schools that were approved under Chapter 766 a long time ago. Okay? This is a configuration of the tests that are being given to our students. It took a few years for all of these tests to get rolled in, but this is the one that's been in existence now for the past several years. And you can see that grades 3 through grade 8, every year there's an English language, arts, reading comprehension test, as well as a mathematics test. There are federal requirements that say needs to happen for every grade level, 3 through 8, and then once in high school. The other federal requirement that we meet is that there needs to be one testing in science, technology, and engineering, once in elementary school, once in middle school, and once in high school. And you can see that bottom row where it's tested in 5th grade, science, 8th grade, and then you see those checks in 9, 10, and 11. That doesn't mean students are tested in each of those grade levels. They have to take one science course in any of those years and be tested on it. Typically, it's biology in grade 9, but it could be biology in grade 10, or it could be chemistry in 10, physics, engineering, whatever, but only passing it once for 10th graders. You'll also see, I think I skipped over the composition, that's for 4th, 7th, and 10th, and that was what was postponed for today, in case you were interested. Okay. I don't know if anybody has seen the test questions on an MCAS, and at the bottom of this slide you can see the website that you can go to see some sample ones, and they do release sample test questions probably in June or July after each testing. And then some old ones still on the website. And in fact, if you open the department website every day, there is a new test question for you to try. Anyway, there's 4 types of questions. One is a multiple choice, and it is the traditional multiple choice, one of 4 choices. Typically, it is not those kind of tricky ones where it could be 1 or 2 or 3 choices. It's one of the 4 choices. The open response is a little bit broader than that, and usually that's worth usually worth 2 to 4 points. The multiple choice is usually only 1 point. And students can get either 1 point, 2 points, or 3 points, or the complete 4, depending on the quality of their response. As you can see, it can be a written response, or it could be a graph or a table or something for math. The short answer for math is a short statement, or actually a computation, and they call that short answer in math. And then the writing prompts and the essays that 4th graders, 7th graders, and 10th graders take are actual essays where in the morning they do a draft of what they're wanting to write, and then in the afternoon they do the final product. And that composition is turned in with both the draft and the final, and it is graded both on grammar and spelling and content of information. Higher emphasis on content information than the grammar. All the other test questions, like the open response and short answer, they do not grade spelling or grammar on those. Okay? Scoring. This is the fun part. This has been scoring, these are scaled scores. There's not the actual number of questions that they got right. They change it into a scaled score so they can compare from year to year. And as you can see, there's 4 categories, starting at the lower one, which is below 220 for students in grades 3 through 8. All they can score is a warning. It is not a failing. It's only 10th graders who have that as a failing. We'll talk about why that is. 220 to about 238 because it usually goes in 2 points, but it could be 239 as well, I suppose, is needs improvement. Proficient is 240 or higher, and advanced is 260 or higher. It's really important for parents, advocates, special ed surrogate parents, to really take a look at how all the students are doing on these MCAS tests. Not just the 10th graders. We're going to talk about the 10th grade and how important that is, but it's really important for all students of all ages who take this test, so that you know and you have a sense of how students are learning the curriculum and how well they're doing and where they need some help. So it's really important to take a look at all of this. If a student is consistently scoring in the needs improvement as a 4th grader, 5th grader, 6th grader, it's hard to anticipate unless something changes that that student is then going to get to the proficient level. So at 10th grade. So it's really important to kind of stay on top of that and really ask about how come the student is scoring the way they are scoring. Let's take a look at why this is a high-stakes test here in Massachusetts. You hear that phrase a lot. Massachusetts chose to make their MCAS test the test for the requirement for graduation for 10th graders to show that they have reached proficiency and they are competent. They call it a competency determination. And to do that, 10th graders have to score 240 or higher in English language arts or mathematics. That's the proficiency or advanced level. If this 10th grader does that, they get their certificate of competency, and then all they need to do, and this is a big only, meet all the requirements of the local high school in order to graduate, take the courses that 11th graders need today and 12th graders. It's not over if a 10th grader meets the proficiency level in English language arts and math. They still have to work very hard to get a high school diploma, but they do have their CD or competency determination. For those students who score between 220 and 238, that is the needs improvement. Those 10th graders have to be on what's called an educational proficiency plan, and we're going to talk about that later in a minute. And those plans, once they complete that, those students then have demonstrated they've reached proficiency, and they then have their CD or their competency determination. Those students who score below 220, they need to be placed on an educational proficiency plan, and they need to continue to be taking retests of the MCAS to get to 220 or higher. So again, we'll talk about that in a minute. In science, it's a different level, and the level to reach proficiency is 220 or higher. Educational proficiency plans are not required for students who score between 220 and 238 in science. They've already fulfilled their requirement. Okay? If they score less than 220, they continue to need to take retests until they can get 220 in the science. EPP. Let's take a closer look at this, because there is a little bit of confusion for students on IEPs. Do they need an EPP or not? Let me tell you what an EPP is. It is a plan that's developed by the school that describes what the student's strengths are and what his weaknesses are based on the MCAS test, as well as the work that they do throughout the year. And then the educational proficiency plan includes a list of courses and the kind of work that that student is going to do in that area that they are weak in, to what they're going to do in order to reach proficiency. These are usually at least a year in length, as the plan is. So the junior year, what's that student going to take in mathematics to demonstrate that they're reaching proficiency? They also need to have some testing, and the schools can make a choice of if they're going to do local testing. There's some testing that can go through community colleges. Also, the state issues what's called an MCAS/EPP test, where the state issues this, but the local school scores it and evaluates it. And students need to complete this educational proficiency plan. If they do so, they will then get a competency determination. They will have met that requirement. Students who are under 220, they need to retest and take the retest at either their junior year, senior year, or even beyond until they get to the 220 point. Okay? You folks are probably hearing the ringing of a phone. I know how. Anyway, we're going to switch now. I'm going to ask Laura to take this over a little bit to talk about students with disabilities and some of your experiences. I'll look for any questions that you might have put on the side, and then I will try to answer them after Laura talks. So, Laura, the floor is yours, okay?
Okay. First, I wanted to thank everybody for attending today. Despite the snow, we all managed to gather, which is good. So, I actually have a daughter who's 18 who is a senior in high school this year who has intellectual disabilities, and so she has actually been taking the MCAS since she was in 3rd grade with accommodations. She's actually done both the MCAS and the MCAS-Alt, which we can talk about. But basically, the MCAS does allow for certain types of accommodations for students with disabilities who are currently on an IEP or a 504 plan. It can be either one of those. It doesn't necessarily mean that the student has to is going to require accommodations in order to take MCAS, but it's something for the team to be considering. The accommodations come in 2 different types of categories. I think, let me see, Peggy.
Let me go down to the, okay. There you go.
Okay. There are different ways, that students can be taking. I was just saying they can be taking without accommodations. They can be taking it with accommodations, and there are 2 different types of accommodations. There's the standard accommodations, which the Department of Education, actually it's the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education here in Massachusetts, that they have put together. And actually, Peggy, thanks for showing the slide. Here is a slide that summarizes all those different types of accommodations that a team, an IEP team or a 504 team, should consider whether or not a student with a disability may benefit from these accommodations. What's really important to keep in mind is if a student is going to use any one of these accommodations, first the accommodation must be in the IEP, in the current IEP, and that current IEP must be signed. So it must be currently in effect. Same thing with the 504 plan. Secondly, in order to consider using any of these accommodations for a student, that student must be using this type of accommodation in the regular general education curriculum when they're taking tests and that sort of thing. So if we quickly look at the accommodations, there's 4 categories, and what's important to keep in mind about these types of accommodations is it's just allowing the student to access and be able to participate in the MCAS. It's not changing anything about the MCAS. So if we take a look at some of the different types of accommodations, the first category is timing and scheduling. All testing is untimed, but each testing session actually lasts an entire day. That's as long as it'll go. So what you might have is a student who needs frequent breaks. Maybe that student has a short attention span, and so maybe what that student would need is to sit for maybe a half an hour, work on the test, and then maybe need to be able to get up and move around for 5 or 10 minutes, something like that. A student who's doing that would probably also need to be in a different setting. If you go down to the second category, either maybe they're doing it in a small group or possibly doing it just a one-on-one in a completely separate classroom, so you're obviously not disturbing the other types of the other children who are taking MCAS. Oh, another accommodation is the time of day, and that would take into account a student who may have some sort of a medical condition, or maybe they function better in the mornings, they function better in the afternoons. It just really depends on the student. You know, another thing to take into consideration are some students who need special lighting or acoustics. Maybe the overhead fluorescent lights are too difficult for them. Maybe they need to be in a smaller room with subtle lighting or something like that. Those are just sort of the settings and the timing and so forth. Then there's actually the presentation. It's how the test is presented to them. One of the big things is the directions. How are the directions being given? Typically what happens is the test moderator will, or proctor, will just read the test directions to all the students. It's certain types of test directions. Other test directions, the student actually needs to be reading them on their own. So for instance, for my daughter, one of the things that we did for her was we had somebody who was always reading the test directions to her and also clarifying them for her, because a lot of times it was multiple steps within one direction and it was just too confusing for her. And so what she really needed was she actually needed to take it by herself, one-on-one. She needed to have that paraprofessional there with her. Sometimes she needed to have the directions read to her several times. Sometimes there was a word she didn't understand and they would clarify it for her. For other types of students who have some sort of a physical disability, they may need some assistance, possibly, you know, writing down their answers. Maybe it is that they're not able to physically write down the answer. Maybe they're having a hard time tracking the test items, going from question to question to question. Sometimes they can get assistance with that, keeping their place. For some students who are visually impaired, obviously the entire test would either need to be read aloud to them, or sometimes you could have some sort of a Braille edition, or sometimes you might need some sort of assistive technology. Maybe they're going to be having working with some sort of a computer or something like that. Then there's also how the student is actually responding. So for instance, using signs or gestures, you know, that would be for a student, again, who is having a hard time writing. Maybe what they're going to be doing is maybe they're going to have somebody write down the answers for them. That is actually, my daughter did that when she was very, very young, when she was in 4th grade. They had somebody who would actually write down the answers for her, because it was very difficult for her to get to process the question, to come up with an answer, and then to find where she needs to write it down on the score sheet. That was a lot. It was just way too much for her. Let me see, just looking at the response accommodations. Math formulas, that's another biggie. For some students, they may just get so bogged down in trying to remember what the various formulas are, is that they're going to not even really pay attention to the question. And again, the idea of providing accommodations is to make the test accessible to everybody, enable them to participate. And so the formula isn't so much as important as in, are they able to know and recognize when they need to use that formula and how to use that formula? So that might be something that might be able to be provided. Another really great accommodation are graphic organizers, checklists, reference sheets. And for those of you that don't know what a graphic organizer is, that is something that you would use to help organize your thoughts. It could be some sort of a flow diagram. It could be something, a lot of times they use it when children are writing compositions to help them organize their topic sentence, their concluding sentence, their supporting sentences, things like that. That's something that my daughter has always used when she is participating in MCAS, because it's really beneficial. Just so you know, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education does have to approve the graphic organizers, the checklists, the reference sheets, the math formulas, all of those things ahead of time, so they know exactly what students are going to be using. So these are just some examples of some standard accommodations. And I think, Peggy, why don't we quickly go to the non-standard accommodations so I can at least explain what those are, which I think is the next slide.
The next slide. I can figure out how to get it to go. There we go. Sorry.
That's okay.
You talk and I'll get it to switch
Okay,
over.
so these are the standard accommodations, and these are already written out. And as long as it is contained within the IEP or the 504 plan, and as long as the student is also using these accommodations during the regular school day, like I said, to be accessing the general curriculum, and it's part of the accommodations that are provided for generally, those are acceptable. There are also some what they call non-standard accommodations, and non-standard accommodations are different. And really what it is, it's I'm trying to think of how I want to, it changes the way the test is being administered, in essence. So an example would be providing a calculator for the non-calculator sections of the mathematics test. To be clear, all students are allowed to use a calculator on certain portions of the test, but there are certain portions of the math test where they are testing to see the student's ability to compute without using a calculator. But for some students, that again kind of defeats the purpose, because they're not even going to be able to participate in that question. And again, getting back to my daughter, who she took MCAS, 10th grade MCAS back in 10th grade, and she failed both the ELA and the math. She had accommodations, and even with those accommodations, she failed. What we did was we added in this past testing session, which was just a couple of weeks ago, the ability to use a calculator, and we'll see how well she did. But it benefited her in the sense that when she got a question that was testing to see, number one, did you know what operation to perform, and then number two, are you able to perform it? For my daughter, she would be able to recognize what she's supposed to be performing, but going through the mechanics and of actually doing it, she can't. And so that's where a calculator would come into play. Another would be having somebody write the composition part. That is actually another accommodation that she has. Her handwriting is so illegible, and it's actually very difficult for her to write. She can't write in cursive, she can only write in print, that it would take her so long to complete the composition part that she wouldn't be able to finish. And on top of that, she would be spending so much time and energy focusing on the actual mechanics of writing that she would be wasting valuable time and energy and really not doing her best, because the ELA is really about the finished product. Are you able to take something that you're thinking about, take an idea, expand on it, and translate that into writing? And so that's another accommodation. The other is reading aloud, the reading comprehension test. Part of reading comprehension is testing a student's ability to read a passage and to be able to digest that information, process it, and understand what it is that passage is talking about. So what's very important to remember about non-standard accommodations is that you do need to get approval ahead of time from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. You have the school has to provide justification for using these, and if the school doesn't, even if the non-standard accommodation is contained in the IEP, the student will not be allowed to use that accommodation. And if for some reason they do use it, their test scores will be invalidated, which is not a situation anybody wants to get into. Okay, and here are some examples of the non-standard accommodations, just giving you a little bit more. Spell check and grammar check is one that we didn't talk about for the ELA composition part. That is where they are looking for spelling and grammar. And again, that is another reason why, if you have a student who really struggles with spelling, really struggles with grammar, it just really may benefit them to avail themselves of this accommodation. But what's really, really important is accommodations need to be part of the discussion during the IEP meeting or the 504 meeting. They really, I think what you really need to keep in mind is that, yes, we're thinking about MCAS and accommodations, but these are accommodations that also would be incorporated, like I keep saying, into what's being done every day with the student, what the student's experience of school is going to be like. So that's really important to keep in mind. I think, Peggy, if we can go back, we were talking about, actually I think go forward, because we were talking about, I want to talk about the MCAS-Alt.
Okay.
So if you can go
Before
to
I switch to the next slide, which is the MCAS-Alt, I just want to point out for everybody, the bottom of this slide, this location of this document that would be invaluable to everybody. If you haven't seen it already, go there. Requirements for the participation of students with disabilities in MCAS 2012-2013. Really important to keep it as current as possible because they do change things. So this is the latest one for this school year, and please go there. It really goes into detail, I think, don't you, Laura?
I do. I actually.
Huh?
It is. I have it in front of me. It's 29 pages, and it really is.
Yeah.
It's very comprehensive, and it's very, very helpful.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. So we were talking earlier about the different ways that students with disabilities can take and participate in MCAS. We talked about how they can participate with no accommodations. We've talked about participating with accommodations. There actually is a third option, and that is called the MCAS alternate assessment, which is completely different than the MCAS test because it's not a test. It's a portfolio that is put together of schoolwork that the student performs or does throughout the entire year. And it's described here. It provides evidence consisting of different types. It's work samples, and so it could be photos, videotapes, data charts. It could be worksheets that they're working on. It could be tests that they're taking. It could be papers. It could be projects. It really can be anything that the teacher feels shows that a student is accessing the general curriculum, i.e. the curriculum frameworks, and that they're accessing their grade level curriculum. So with the example of my daughter, so when my daughter was when my daughter was in third grade, we had her take MCAS for the first time without accommodations. And we made that decision because we didn't quite know how well she was going to do. We wanted to give her a chance to just try it on her own and see how it went. And I was fully in support of that because MCAS in general is one of the pieces, one of the tools that the school will use to see, number one, that a student is accessing the general curriculum. They're going to do it, two, to see how well the child's progressing within the general curriculum. And three, it kind of shows how good of a job the school, the class, the classroom, the teacher, everybody is doing in general in educating the child. So after third grade, what we decided to do for fourth, fifth, and actually we did it fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, we had her do a portfolio. And so what they basically do is they will identify within each curriculum framework area, they'll pick out 2 or 3 strands, curriculum strands, that the student has a particular strength in, and really a strand within which they have a lot of evidence to show that the student is accessing the curriculum and making some progress. So with the example of my daughter, what they would do is they would collect work samples over the course of the school year, and I want to say it was probably in March. They would assemble all original work, and they would submit it all to the Department of Education, and the Department of, or I should say the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, they have a whole team of graders who will grade this ultimate assessment portfolio. What's important to keep in mind is that only a small percentage of students actually do the MCAS-Alt. It's really only reserved for students who, for instance, like my daughter, who had some significant cognitive disabilities. And it really, by taking the MCAS, because I should tell you that when she took her third grade MCAS, she obviously did very, very poorly. It was no surprise, but it kind of gave us a baseline and something to work from in the future in trying to figure out accommodations. And in her case, it was to figure out whether or not to have her do MCAS-Alt or the regular MCAS. And like I said, we had her do the MCAS-Alt. But MCAS-Alt is also helpful for students who are unable to maintain sufficient concentration to participate in MCAS. You know, a student who's not able to sit there for long stretches of time and to be able to complete that test. Like we were saying earlier, a testing session only lasts one day. So if you have a student who really can only maintain concentration for 30 to 45 minutes in any given school day, MCAS is probably not going to be a really accurate way of measuring that student's competency or ability to access and to progress within the general education. It's also used for students who have significant physical, medical, or health-related disabilities who may not, again, be able to sit through a long exam, or that it would just take much longer for them to complete the exam. And so we have a third example here of students with significant motor or communication disorders. Again, students who are not able to respond to questions and to really give a thoughtful, careful, and careful response that really measures what it is that they're learning. So again, MCAS-Alt is a decision that's made by the team. It's not made by the parent. It's not made by one teacher. It's a discussion that the team should have, and it shouldn't be an afterthought. It should definitely be part of the full team discussion. I was mentioning earlier that they have a whole scoring team for the MCAS-Alt, and there are 5 different categories that scorers are using when they're looking at the portfolio. And what's important to remember is they're not going to give weight to one specific document within that portfolio. They're going to look at the portfolio in general. They're going to look at the portfolio in its entirety when they're assessing what type of a score to give to students. And so it says that here that the scores are based on the completeness of the material submitted. So by completeness, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has put out guidelines for teachers when they're putting together portfolios of what exactly needs to be contained within that portfolio. How many different pieces of evidence, what types of evidence, and that sort of thing. And so that's something that a scorer is going to be looking at. They need to have sufficient evidence to give a reasonable score and be able to make a reasonable determination of what kind of a score to assign. Also, they're going to be looking at the level of difficulty and the range of learning standards. So what you want to be seeing is a progression of difficulty over the course of the school year. Obviously, at the beginning of the school year, kids are starting to just get back. They're getting back into the swing of things. They're starting in their new grade, starting with their new teacher, and so forth. And so as the student becomes more comfortable in the school setting as the school goes on and new material is being taught to them, you want to see a progression. Obviously, they're going to be looking at the accuracy of the student's performance. It is a competency determination, and so they want to be making sure that the student is demonstrating that they've learned the material. And again, there's many different ways to be demonstrating that, which is why they do a portfolio for some students. You're going to look at the level of independence. What you want is you want to be showing the scores that the student is able to do the work as independently as possible. So the level of accuracy and the level of difficulty is also demonstrating some independence by the student. They also want to see varied instructional approaches, methods of response, and so forth. And that just gets back to what I was talking about before, is you want to have a variety of different types of documentation in that portfolio that's demonstrating what the student is learning, how the student is learning, and if the student has mastered or generalized the information. The other thing, too, that they look at is self-evaluation by the student. Is the student demonstrating that, hey, yeah, I am getting a sense of this information. I'm able to use it. I'm able to grasp it. And that is, you can demonstrate that in a lot of different ways. You can do it by just, informally evaluating the student. When it was talking about submitting videos of the student, I know for my daughter that is something that they did do, and the videos were showing her accessing curriculum, her demonstrating knowledge of the material that was being shown, and I'm trying to remember what exactly it was. One of it was an oral. One example is an oral presentation. One year, as part of the curriculum frameworks, one of the things that students had to do was to present information to their class, and so they videotaped my daughter doing that. And so that videotape was showing her accessing the information, her demonstrating knowledge. And by demonstrating that knowledge on her own, it's somewhat of a self-evaluative measure. So that's just sort of a thumbnail overview of what the MCAS-Alt is. And just so you as surrogate parents understand, is that your role is in helping to make the determination whether or not students are going to be doing the MCAS or the MCAS-Alt. The school is the one who actually puts together the portfolio. That's not something that you have to worry about. The school will do that, and they'll keep you in the loop about that. There are consent forms that you'll need to be signing and that sort of thing. An important thing to keep in mind, Peggy was talking earlier about graduating, and she was talking about the various scores that you need to get in order to graduate, and we were talking about if you don't get a 220 on either the ELA or actually on ELA and math, that you might have an educational proficiency plan. It's different with the MCAS-Alt. They can use it to satisfy the competency determination in order to qualify for a diploma. And what they're looking for is, and it's right here, is that they're demonstrating that they have a level of achievement that's comparable to what students have passed the regular MCAS have demonstrated. And it's important to remember that it's comparing it to students who took the MCAS and passed, whether it be with or without accommodations. And so, again, it's only a very, very small number of students who actually use the MCAS-Alt to satisfy the graduation requirement. In the instance of my daughter, I mentioned earlier that she did fail both the 10th grade ELA and the 10th grade math. She did take the 10th grade biology exam, and what's interesting, Peggy, you were talking earlier about getting a 220. My daughter actually scored a 218. And what's interesting is she has taken all of the coursework, and she's on an IEP. She does have accommodations in the classroom, which means also that she's getting modified tests and quizzes and things like that. And so because she did well in the modified biology classes that she did take, the high school applied to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education for an appeal, asking that the 218 be considered a passing score, and they did approve that. So my daughter has now passed the biology, even though she didn't get the full score of the 220. But one thing to keep in mind is that she did, like I said, she failed the ELA and the math 10th grade with accommodations, both with standard and non-standard accommodations. We decided to offer it to her again this year. And so I should probably just, I think I told you a couple of the accommodations that she had, and really the most, I guess the most important accommodation that she had was the non-standard one of not having to actually physically write out the ELA composition and the use of the calculator. She was able to pass the ELA this past fall, so she has satisfied that requirement. She has the educational proficiency plan, and so as far as the local high school, the school district, and the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education are concerned, she has passed ELA. We're actually waiting on the math, and we'll have to see. I actually had a conversation with her teacher this morning, and it sounds like she probably did not pass. Just her teacher was the one who was working with her when my daughter took it one-on-one, and my daughter really, really struggled with it. And so that actually brings up, what do you do when a student has finished 12th grade, they've met all of the graduation coursework requirements that the local school district requires, but they haven't passed MCAS? What do they do? And so this slide talks about what are some of their options. They do have that option, if they didn't pass it in 10th grade, of retaking it in 11th grade and also retaking it in 12th grade. If, when it comes time for graduation, it's 12th grade, they still haven't passed, they do have the opportunity to walk with their graduating class. They'll get what's called, I believe it's a certificate of attendance. They're not going to get their full-fledged diploma, but they will be able to get this document that says that they attended, they've taken all the required classes, they just haven't met that last requirement of passing MCAS. But that doesn't end there. If they want, they can continue retaking MCAS for years. If they, well, years sounds like it's going to go on forever, but for several years thereafter. Obviously, there are students who don't pass, and at some point they do need to make a decision what they want to do. There's also the opportunity to contact one of the local community colleges. They may have a program that can help students continue preparing and studying for the MCAS to hopefully pass it. The other thing you can do is you can always appeal. I was telling you before about the biology. What we did was, it was actually the school who did it, but you can appeal to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So the take-home point here is to keep in mind that if a student does not pass, a student with a disability or a student without a disability doesn't pass the 10th grade MCAS and they have completed 12th grade, there are still options available to them. Peggy, is there anything else you want me to cover?
Let me just jump in, and then there's one more slide, and then we're nearing the end, so that we need to kind of talk a little bit about what part 2 will be. But I just want to emphasize that there certainly are students who are not on IEPs who struggle to pass, to get score 220 or higher. And there are some students who can do the work but are really frozen, so to speak, when it comes to taking tests. So this appeals process is an important one to keep in mind for some of our students who really have problems, taking tests. They may or may not be on IEPs. These EPPs are really important paperwork, but it is a process. It represents a process that shows that the student is doing the work. A student who has good attendance, who does the work, who tests well in a different situation, still struggling to make that 220, very well may get appealed. The principal has to initiate that appeals process. So we're not going to initiate it for a kid who is not attending school, who is not doing the work, etc. So it's real important for us to support our students and to keep their morale up as they do this work, even though that they don't pass that MCAS the first time or the second time. This is just a slide that talks a little bit about what else is possible for students who don't pass the MCAS. It talks about the certificate of attendance or attainment. Number 5, that Laura, you mentioned. But you can see that there's other work and learn programs, trade programs, possibly even getting a high school equivalency. This is what happens for many students who drop out early and then want to get a high school diploma. A GED program will work. And number 6 is a real important reminder for all of our kids who are on IEPs that it is a possibility for them to continue to receive services until their 22nd birthday. And I think that's a real important thing. I know that Laura is, that's on your mind as well for your daughter.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So I'm seeing that we have just a few more minutes, and I am not sure that I have seen any questions. I have been listening to Laura, and I haven't seen some of the questions that I could maybe answer.
Peggy, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, I have a couple of questions here that you might not have seen.
Okay.
One of them is from Jonathan Smith, and he's asking, do parents participate or do they have input in the development of the alternative assessment?
Do you want to answer that, Peggy? Do you want me to?
Well, you can, but yeah, Laura, you do it.
So I don't think they're precluded from doing that, and I think it's certainly worth sitting down and having a meeting with the teacher. but ultimately it is the teacher who determines what material they want to be submitting with a portfolio.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that I was going to mention is that online there is lots of information about the alternative assessments for educators and for parents to get and advocates to get their hands on that, to really see what's involved in that might be very useful because they could provide some input, especially, Laura, you were saying that looking for the student's strengths, or interests, in particular how you take the general curriculum and build on the student's strengths to learn those concepts. That would be great to put in the portfolio. So
right.
I think the more that the teachers and parents talk about it, about what's going to, what kind of work is going to be collected during that year, the better, I think. Yeah.
Yep, I agree with you.
Questions?
Yes, there's one from Dee Springer, and I think I understand what she's asking. She's asking if there's a retest going to take place, and the accommodation isn't in the IEP. And she says, for example, the scribe that you were talking about, Laura,
Yep.
must the IEP get amended to include that before the retest?
Yes.
Yes.
So you can only use an accommodation for if that accommodation is listed in the currently approved IEP, meaning the IEP that's currently in effect, and it must be signed by the parent or the surrogate parent.
Okay. And the scribe could only be used, as I understand it, if it has been used as an accommodation in the classroom, right?
That's correct, but it must also be listed as an accommodation, an MCAS accommodation on the IEP or the 504 plan.
Okay, all right, so it has to go in two places, essentially.
Yes, so the student has to be using that in the classroom.
Yes.
It has to be written in one place on the IEP, but then it has to be in use in the classroom, day in and day out, or when taking tests. Yep.
Okay.
So what they don't want to have is they don't want a student using an accommodation on the MCAS that they don't use regularly during the school year.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, let me just wrap up a little bit before you say goodbye, Janie, and that is that next month when we have our webinar, we're really going to do part 2, and we're going to really take a look at the parent-guardian report. This is something that's real important for parents to take a look at, and educational advocates should have their hands on this, and special education surrogate parents. I was surprised when some of special education surrogate parents told me they've never seen this for their students. This is really important information, so we're going to talk about it. If you can find your student's parent-guardian report, dig it up. We can talk about it and see what kinds of information is contained here that's going to help you better advocate for your child in getting the kinds of instruction or accommodations that might be needed. It takes a little bit of time to kind of look at this. In fact, when I was talking with Laura, when we were planning this, Laura says, I've seen my daughters, but it's so confusing, right?
Oh, gosh, absolutely.
Yes, like, what does that all mean? And we'll try to decipher that, and we will do that in part 2. And included, we decided to include here, if I can get it, I don't know why, there it is, some resources for you. I took some time updating these websites and stuff for you. So check all this stuff out on the department. And here is that MCAS-Alt, the document that's really very helpful for you to find out. And there's also the resource guide for students. It's dated 2006, but it's still very current in terms of the curriculum. So I think that's all that I have to say for now. Laura, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that's it. I hope this has been helpful for people.
Well, thank you so much, Laura and Peggy. And I think we're done with questions, unless you have the audience has a few last questions to ask. We do have, well, 1 minute. So type them in if you have them. If you think of questions later, you can send them to me at jcrecco, C-R-E-C-C-O, at fcsn.org, and I can get Peggy or Laura to answer you your particular questions. On Thursday, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah. Janie, are we doing Thursday?
Yes, I was just going to mention on Thursday we are having a conference call. And the specifics of how to come in on the conference call were on the original invitation that was sent out about the webinar. It's possible that Emily can resend it tomorrow to everyone who registered for the webinar. And it's as simple as just dialing in some numbers, and you will hear Laura and Peggy, and they will answer very specific questions at that time also. And that is from 12:30 to 1:30 on Thursday. And other than that, I think we are all set. I did want to mention again the Survey Monkey that will come to you in your email, and if you could fill that out, that would be wonderful, so that we can get some feedback about this particular webinar and the webinars in general. Other than that, I'm going to sign off and say goodbye, and we'll talk again on Thursday. Thank you all.